Aaron, Andy, thank you for joining me today for this brief interview about your global learning escapades last semester.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. So I had an interesting phone conversation with Andy one morning at the end of last semester, and you were so excited. I could hear the excitement in your voice for all that had happened in terms of students' global learning. And before we get to that, though, I want to ask you guys just a general question. So what brought you to FIU?
So I had the opportunity to meet with a former employee that worked in the Honors College, and he told me all about the Honors College at FIU, and I told him what Aaron and I did in terms of Israeli innovation and entrepreneurship and bringing Israeli companies to the United States and bringing companies from the United States to Israel. And Miami is blossoming at the moment, as everyone knows. And a lot of Israeli companies are making their way to Miami. And the idea came with Dean Espinosa that we should introduce the students in the Honors College to the concept of Israeli innovation and why so much is coming out of a small country in the Middle East.
Awesome. Well, and I've gone to your website, which I definitely want you to go ahead and share with us so anyone listening can see that as well.
Thank you.
Happy to.
All right. Remind me again, tell me what the website is. I've been there.
www.nyisrael.org.
I thought it was an easy one. Excellent. Okay.
We're in the middle of changing it and migrating everything to a broader domain name that includes all of the U.S., especially our activities in Florida, but it's taking some time.
All right. But anyone who goes to that website would then just be redirected. So it'll probably be seamless in the long run.
Yes,
we hope so.
We hope so.
Good deal. All right. Tell us what global learning course you taught last semester, like the title of it.
The title of our course last semester was Innovation Nation, the Global Influence of Israeli Technology and Entrepreneurship.
And that just sounds exciting from the get-go. And what were your goals and intentions for student learning?
Yeah, so as Andy mentioned, we know what's going on in Israel. We know how much of an outsized impact Israeli startups are having on the global economy, especially as we continue to adopt new technologies and adapt to new situations. Mm-hmm. So the course objectives were, bringing the students awareness, first of all, of what's happening in Israel, mm-hmm. since I think not necessarily, most people don't necessarily associate Israel with their burgeoning startup scene. So bringing that global awareness. Also, we brought in guest speakers every class, which I think some of them were Israeli entrepreneurs, some of them were in government, some of them were local entrepreneurs or government leaders who were impacted by Israeli technology in one way or another. So in this regard, we gave them, multifaceted perspective on what's happening. And we also tasked them with trying to come up with their own startup ideas and to think, put their Israeli hats on and engage in a global issue and try to come up with a solution for it.
And I'll also add, Sherrie, and Aaron knows this is my famous story that I say, and it just repeated itself again in this class, but we do a word bank on the first day of class, and we put up the word Israel, and typically the associations are tension, war, history, and I think at the end of the class, I know for sure if we put that same word back up, these 11 students that we have are essentially ambassadors for Israel walking around Miami now and could give you a much wider range of what actually Israel means to them and what's going on currently in their tech scene, what's happening in Jerusalem, what's happening in Tel Aviv. They could actually identify where it is on the map, who their neighbors are. And so just in terms of knowledge, I think they grow significantly for a country that they really knew very little about beforehand.
Well, and that's definitely part of global learning, like creating new ambassadors, and that they're here on the ground in Miami is exciting.
And I want to say it works both ways as well. We have 2 students in our current class now. We did the same word bank, and they're from Venezuela. And the concepts that Aaron and I had in our mind about Venezuela, they shattered on the first day of class as well. So the learning is going both ways.
Which means you're both excellent teachers because you're also willing to learn. So that's exciting. All right. So what do you think bringing outside speakers kind of added to or changed what you intended for the class initially?
Yeah, so the speakers we brought in are genuine experts in their respective fields. So they were able to give the students a very insightful look at what's happening and to talk about their specific situations. And I just think that, we brought in the CEO of a company that is creating a pill for insulin delivery as opposed to getting injections. We brought in a nonprofit that brings water and solar technology to Africa. We brought in, a local CEO of an Israeli company that does robotic surgeries. So we're just trying to give them exposure to a lot of things that are happening out there that are changing our world, and to hear it directly from those who are leading the way.
All right. So Andy, when you called, you shared with me the story of one specific student and how she changed across the course. Can you kind of share that story again?
Well, I'm not sure which exact story that you're referring to, but I can tell you, circling back to the speaker that Aaron was referring to with the oral insulin pill, he spoke to the students about what is your competitive edge. And I think prior to that class, that maybe coming from another country and your English not being as strong as maybe you wanted it to be, he actually turned it around and said, your native tongue can help you while you're sitting around a boardroom table, because bringing a different language and a different culture to the table brings a different perspective that maybe I don't necessarily have. So I don't think prior to the class, the students thought that maybe being an immigrant beforehand or growing up someplace else was something that would help them with their job and what is their competitive edge. And it was really exciting to read the reflection reports to see how proud they really were of their history and what they could bring to the table. And I think that was celebrated throughout the semester.
So the student I had in mind, you described her as being rather shy at the beginning of the course. I see now that you're thinking back about her. Tell me more about her.
She was a lovely student and was incredibly reserved at the beginning of class, and not so much willing to raise her hand, even though she had fantastic answers and was incredibly thoughtful. She had expressed to Aaron and I that this was an area where she didn't feel comfortable. And we had a site visit to Wix, and on the spot, the students had to do a pitch for their startup ideas, which I didn't know was happening, and neither did they. And to our surprise, she volunteered and was one of the first to pitch her startup idea. Not only was she fantastic, she nailed it. I think it was one of the best pitches that Wix heard. And her sense of growth throughout the semester and accomplishment, you could just see she was beaming. And it was, as a professor, it was amazing. As just another individual watching someone grow, it was fantastic. And I guess most importantly, she was incredibly proud.
Definitely. And I know you were proud of her as well.
We both were. We both were.
Aaron, can you think of another student perhaps that you observed growing across this process?
Yeah, look, I think honestly, I think a lot of our students came into our class not really knowing what to expect. I'm not sure they had given much thought to Israel. I know Andy had mentioned the word bank, but I think they took the class for whatever reason, maybe because of scheduling, but it wasn't because, as you mentioned, the title was that great. I don't know. But I think we watched a few of the students really embrace some of the possibilities that are out there.
Mhm.
You know, this is a very tech entrepreneurship focused class. But we had students who want to be lawyers, students who are going to be accountants and doctors, and not necessarily the next Elon Musk, although I think we may have one of those also. And I think each one of them was able to understand that no matter what field they're in, there's a way that technology and innovation can play a role. So from my perspective, I think a lot of these students were surprised by what is possible for them. And we saw a lot of growth on that. And as you know, we visited Wix, as Andy mentioned. This is an Israeli company that makes web design easier, and they have a huge office in South Beach. And you know, I think a lot of the students being in an actual office and seeing how it operates were really taken to how the real world kind of works once they finished their studies at FIU. And a lot of them started asking us about internships at Wix, whether or not they want to be, you know, tech people or not, but just to be part of that kind of office. And we've actually been working with Wix and a few of the other companies that visited us on establishing a more formal internship track.
All right. Well, and we have some of our Global Learning Medallion students actually use Wix as their tool when they create their personal portfolio of how they've changed through global learning. And we have, you know, we have their websites available on our website as a link. So I'm glad that that company is one you guys worked with as well. So how has your teaching for global learning kind of evolved in light of everything that happened last semester? If you would kind of maybe take me back to what your thoughts were about global learning before you actually started teaching for global learning, and then where they are now.
So I'll jump in.
Okay, I'll go after.
Look, global learning is a way for us as teachers to organize our thoughts a little bit better. Of course, we bring in speakers who add perspective, but we don't necessarily think about it within the context of global learning. We think about it as people we know who are doing great things. What was unique about, maybe not, I don't know if it's unique, to us it was unique about last semester, is with COVID, you know, Zoom has become part of our lives, and it's also not part of our teaching. So we were able to bring in some experts who are right now in Israel and have them speak directly with the students, which I think if we would have proposed that a year ago, that would have sounded crazy. 2 years ago, forget about it. And in a way, having this like devoted, concerted effort to global learning has almost enabled a wider range of views and insights.
All right. Andy, I heard you wanted to jump in on this one too.
I think maybe piggybacking on a little bit what Aaron said, having the ability to hear from these speakers, we were able to tap into for-profit and not-for-profit, and something that shouldn't be shocking, but it was pleasantly shocking, was we had a not-for-profit organization called Innovation Africa, and they bring water to cities in Africa, and they really do incredible work. And I think some of our students were almost moved to tears. And the question was posed after they all had their startup ideas, but none of them had a social impact component to it. And I think they thought after they heard the speaker, wow, we never even thought to include a social impact component in our startups. And the wheels started to turn maybe we'll donate a portion of our sales to X, or how can we help the communities with our products? And it was kind of fascinating to see how it clicked right away after hearing the speaker that maybe their companies can do good for their communities. And so that was in my mind, that was fantastic and pretty instantaneous.
So in line with kind of how you're thinking about global learning and how it sounds like students are going to engage with local and maybe even international or global peoples in a way that they can help now. Do you think that the spirit of collaboration maybe became greater across the semester as they were engaging with each other and with your course content?
For sure. So one of the main outcomes we wanted and designed for this class was the opportunity and challenges that come with working with a team. Because the main goal of this class is to better prepare our students for the jobs. That's our main goal. Get the students better prepared for jobs and have them maybe think a little bit differently, maybe the Israeli way, to add some perspective when they go into the workforce. So it was very important to us. This is why within the semester, our students worked on startups as a team. We could have easily had them do it, come up with their own idea and work on that throughout the whole semester, but we wanted them to, just get that experience. And it's not always a good experience. There's challenges. We had students come up to us and say, hey, another student on our team is not available. What are we going to do? I said, look, you got to work through this. You got to find a time that works, and you got to figure this out. And it might be that you're going to have to carry the slack for him or her, and maybe they're going to carry for you one day. But this is part of the experience. And for us, it was as important as the textbooks. Is just having that experience and some of the challenges and opportunities that come with working with others.
For sure. And I think it's neat that you kind of gave it back to them, the problem itself, that this is the real world. And part of working with others is figuring out when and how can we meet, as well as picking that slack up. Andi, you wanted to say something there.
No, I'll just say it was very apparent from day one, because the students had to, we didn't choose who was going to be on their teams. They chose, and they worked it out amongst themselves. There was something interesting that happened that was sort of lovely. At one point, we were sort of like, why didn't you choose this person? And the class answered, well, we knew that team, let's just say team B, needed them, so we didn't take them. So it was like quite lovely that they were thinking that way. Also, we saw the same example again when they were divvying up equity. I will say that they rethought and changed their equity after we said, you might not want to give that person so much. But everyone started out really caring about their fellow students, which was very nice to see.
But also not necessarily realistic.
Yeah, they changed. They changed their view.
Not realistic in what way?
Well, the real world, you don't necessarily, when it's real money we're talking about, and you're trying to get equity from a startup, you may want more equity for yourself, and the other person deals with their own issues.
They started out, let's just say it was 100%, and there were 4 people. They gave each person 25%, for example. And after we started to say, well, what if this person doesn't show up? What if they have another job? What if they get married and they have a family and are you sure you still want to give 25%? And they wound up ultimately changing their numbers, but it was a good reality lesson.
All right. So looking back on how your teaching maybe evolved, what are your plans for this semester? You said you're teaching it again. Any changes that are happening this semester because of some things that happened last semester?
So our class is different this semester. It's sort of the same lens, but it's a different lesson plan. So Israel also happens to be fantastic at pioneering technology and concepts for social impact. And our class this semester is basically talking about Israel, the Israeli approach to social impact.
Mhm.
So how, this other culture is bringing technology and creativity to something that we all need and want to see more of. So we're actually, the fall semester, our students worked on a project, right? They broke up into teams of 3 and they each came up with new startup ideas. This semester, our students are working in partnership with United Way Miami, and half the class are at FIU and half the classes are at the United Way Miami campus. And we're teaching them some of the same principles on Israeli innovation entrepreneurship, why Israel's great at it, why is it different, why is it the same in the US and other cultures, while in parallel, they're going to be working on a real world local challenge that United Way Miami is directing, and for them to maybe bring perspective and teamwork into solving it.
Excellent. So in a few words, what is one of the biggest things we can learn from Israel in terms of global learning or social impact that you are hoping your students take away with them?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the biggest lesson from Israel's approach to this is that failure is okay. In many ways, it's celebrated, which I think is a very different approach and mentality than we have in the US. If you work on a startup in Israel and it fails, you're actually more likely to get a job in your next startup because they value the lessons you learned from the failure. And it's just a very different approach and mentality. And failure there, no one likes to fail. It's not like people want to see a failed project or a failed startup or whatever it might be. But in Israel, there's way more openness to failure, and it's embraced as long as you learn from that and are able to improve upon it, which I think just in the US is a totally different mentality. And as long as we can maybe pull some of that from Israel and its approach, we'll all be better off.
Well, and what a great lesson for your students that ultimately failure is still success.
Exactly. Well said.
Andi, was there anything you wanted to add?
I would just say that a theme that comes across often in our class is that immigrants are really celebrated. And I think it's very appropriate at FIU. And I would say that Israeli companies really seek to embrace immigrants, that they bring a lot to the table, and something that maybe someone didn't look before to see as something positive really is something that people are seeking out. And that should be celebrated. And I think in Miami in particular, it's very apropos and very similar to Israel. And I think it resonates a lot with our students.
No doubt.
Yeah, Israel is very much an immigrant country.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason why a lot of people think Israel's so successful in its startup culture is that immigrants are risk takers. So if you're a risk taker, it sort of ties into the failure part. It goes hand in hand. People are trying new things and trying to really disrupt the world in a good way. And really, immigrants have a lot to bring there because, to move from one place to another, already you're way ahead of most people in the world on risk taking. And then to make it in that society, you have to think about all the things that are required to get ahead. So the risk taking is a really big lesson, we believe, in why the Israeli startup culture is so strong.
And I think we just taught class yesterday, and I don't actually think the students even recognize how brave they are. One of our students lives in Aventura with just her sister, and her family is in Panama. And I was like, that's unbelievable. You are incredibly brave and amazing that you're trying to get a better education, a better opportunity for yourself. Another one, she's been here for 4 years. The rest of her family is still, where is she from? Venezuela, is still in Venezuela. She's here on a visa. And I was like, that's also incredibly brave. And these are rare experiences that not everybody has. And you have to be a certain type of personality to be willing to take those risks. And these students embody that.
That's true. This part of our conversation reminds me of something you said in that phone call, Andy. You talked about how bringing different perspectives to the table will make a new endeavor more likely, anyway, to be successful than otherwise. Do you remember when you told me about that one of your speakers was telling the students about having different perspectives in a new business as opposed to bringing people in that you're comfortable with and probably see things the same way?
Yes. So I think what you're referring to is the same speaker that spoke about competitive edge, but he basically said, not that he doesn't value the Harvard, the Princeton graduate. He's like, but give me a kid who's worked at a gas station, who's worked 3 jobs, and I'm hiring that person. And you don't often hear that. And I think it was refreshing to hear. And I think it really resonated with the students as well.
Yeah, the other book, one of the books we read is called The Founder's Dilemmas. And it's basically a book that talks through all the decision making that goes into the beginnings of a company. And as Andy had mentioned, we left a lot of the responsibility to the students. We actually wanted that to be part of their lesson is, hey, you're in the driver's seat. You want to choose this person on your team? That's great. Why? And this book talks you through some of these decisions. And one of the main points that in forming a team is, do you want the same perspective? Do you want different perspectives? What are the advantages of one? What are the disadvantages? And, just thinking through that process.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think the last question is, what's on the horizon as you guys are moving forward? I feel like you're probably constantly kind of looking ahead and planning. So anything you want to share?
So look, we think that what's happening in Miami and in Florida now is really well aligned with what Israel is looking to do, as far as helping Miami get to the next place, wherever that might be, with all this future technology it's bringing. And as we think ahead with what we're doing at FIU, we're trying to bridge the hiring needs of these Israeli companies with the job needs of students coming out of college. So our focus is always jobs, jobs, jobs. And if we can help the students find employment and maybe through an Israeli company, then I think we've really worked towards our goal.
Well, and that's certainly the goal of students coming to the university, is to, not just further their education, but their careers. So I find all of this extremely exciting. I'm so glad that you agreed to meet with me today. Andy, Aaron, thank you.
Thank you, Sherrie.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for exposing us to global learning.
Again, my pleasure.
You are.